How to trigger an avoidant to realize your worth. Let me ask you something. Have you ever poured your energy into someone who constantly pulls away just when things start to feel real? They tell you they like you, they just need space, or aren't ready, or don't want to ruin the friendship. And yet they still text you late at night, still get jealous, still give you just enough to keep you hoping. That is an avoidant. But here's the truth. You don't make an avoidant realize your worth by chasing them. You do it by becoming someone who doesn't need them to. Let me be blunt, an avoidant doesn't fear intimacy as much as they fear losing control of their emotional safety. And the moment they sense someone is willing to sacrifice themselves just to win them over, they don't feel flattered, they feel powerful. And then they pull away even more. So what do? You don't try to prove you're enough. You act like someone who already knows you are. You stop over-functioning in the relationship. You stop playing therapist, fixer, or emotional babysitter. You stop being their safe harbor while they leave you in the storm. And most importantly, you detach from the fantasy and connect with the reality. Because here's the real kicker, avoidants don't miss the people who stick around no matter what. They miss the ones who walk away when they're not met halfway, when you have boundaries, when you communicate with clarity, when you don't reward inconsistency with more affection. That's when something shifts. That's when the avoidant goes, wait, where did they go? Why aren't they chasing me? That's when they begin to reflect. And if they're capable of really showing up, they'll come back different. But if they don't, then congratulations, you just saved yourself years of emotional starvation. Remember this, your worth isn't proven by convincing someone to love you. It's revealed when you're willing to walk away if they don't. When you find yourself emotionally invested in someone with an avoidant attachment style, it's tempting to believe that if you just do a little more, show more affection, be more understanding, prove your loyalty, they'll finally let their guard down. You imagine that your consistency will earn their consistency. But this dynamic rarely plays out the way you hope. In reality, the more you chase an avoidant, the more you reinforce their belief that closeness equals pressure. And when someone associates emotional intimacy with suffocation, your attempts to get closer only push them further away. The truth is, chasing someone who is pulling back doesn't come across as love. It comes across as fear. Fear of losing them. Fear of being alone. Fear that you're not enough unless they choose you. That fear, no matter how well you mask it, sends a message: I'm more invested in proving my worth to you than I am in protecting my emotional well-being. An avoidant picks up on that. They don't see your pursuit as romantic, they see it as an invitation to keep running. You can't fix their discomfort with closeness by being the one who always leans in harder. When you value yourself enough to step back, something powerful happens. You change the energy between you. Instead of being the one who's always available, always texting first, always holding the emotional weight of the connection, you give space not just for them, but for you. You begin to see how exhausting it's been to maintain a one-sided emotional performance. You stop trying to decode mixed signals or romanticize breadcrumbs. You begin to operate from a place of self-respect, where your feelings matter just as much as theirs. Avoidants often thrive in the imbalance where the other person does all the emotional work. It keeps them in control. But the moment you step back, you upset that dynamic. You stop giving them the comfort of knowing you'll always be there, no matter how distant or inconsistent they are. And that shift, that's when they start noticing your absence, noticing the silence, noticing that the person who used to revolve around them now has a center of gravity of their own. That's when the story begins to change if they're capable of change. Chasing someone is not an act of love. It's an act of fear disguised as devotion. It places their needs, their timelines, and their fears above your own. But stepping back, that's an act of love for yourself. It sends a clear signal: I know what I bring to the table, and I'm not going to beg someone to sit down. You don't have to be cold or manipulative, just calm, confident, and consistent in your standards. When you stop chasing, you stop feeding the avoidance fear of engulfment and start giving them a real reason to value your presence, because it's no longer guaranteed. Avoidants aren't running from love, they're running from vulnerability, from losing control, from feeling emotionally exposed. To them, closeness often equals danger, and the safest way to protect themselves is by maintaining emotional distance. When someone gets too close, too fast, or too emotionally available, it can trigger discomfort rather than connection. That's why the more you try to prove your love through constant reassurance or relentless pursuit, the more an avoidant recoils. They don't experience that pursuit as comforting. Instead, it feels like pressure, like something they have to manage or escape from. At the heart of avoidant attachment is a deep need to remain in control. Control gives them emotional safety. The moment they feel like someone is trying to change them, fix them, or become indispensable to them. They don't feel grateful, they feel trapped. That emotional pressure, even if it's subtle, can trigger their defense mechanisms: detachment, criticism, withdrawal, or inconsistency. What they want is autonomy. What they fear is losing it. So when you try to bridge the gap by doing more, giving more, loving harder, what you're unintentionally doing is feeding the very dynamic that keeps them distant. The irony is that the more available and emotionally generous you become, the less valued your presence tends to be. In a healthy relationship, love is reciprocal. But with an avoidant, if you're always the one bending, compromising, and initiating, you're not creating intimacy, you're maintaining a power imbalance. They're in control, and you're constantly reacting to their pace, their mood, their level of interest. That imbalance becomes the foundation of the relationship, and over time, it chips away at your self-esteem while reinforcing their emotional aloofness. Avoidants are often more drawn to people who don't overfunction in the relationship. The ones who keep their dignity, their independence, and their standards intact. These are the people who don't chase, but instead let the avoidant come forward in their own time if they choose to. That non-reactive stance disrupts the control dynamic. Suddenly, the avoidant isn't being pursued or managed. They're faced with someone who isn't trying to earn love, but is simply being lovable and willing to walk away if that love isn't matched. Trying to manage an avoidant's comfort level with emotional intimacy by giving more will never lead to closeness. It will only lead to you shrinking yourself to fit into their limited emotional range. The only way to change the dynamic is to stop participating in the game of control altogether. When you stop rewarding their distance with more effort and instead hold steady in your own value, you shift the power from control to mutual respect. It's easy to get caught up in the potential of a person, especially when dealing with someone who has avoidant tendencies. You see glimpses of who they could be, how they light up during vulnerable moments, how they speak about their dreams, or how they show care when they let their guard down. And those moments, though rare, can feel powerful. They give you hope. They make you believe that if you're just patient enough, if you hang in there a little longer, they'll eventually come around and show up for the relationship fully. This belief creates a dangerous attachment to the fantasy of who they might become, instead of the reality of who they consistently are. Living in the fantasy means excusing red flags because of emotional breadcrumbs. It means interpreting mixed signals in the most hopeful way possible, convincing yourself that silence means they're just thinking, that distance means they're just scared, and that inconsistency means they're just working through things. While these explanations might have some truth, they often serve as justifications that keep you emotionally invested in someone who isn't actually meeting your needs. Avoidance can be especially difficult to let go of because their love is intermittent. One day they're attentive, the next they're cold. One day they're affectionate, the next they're distant. This inconsistency creates a psychological effect similar to gambling. You don't know when the next reward is coming, so you keep pulling the lever, hoping this time it'll be different. This cycle is addictive, and it keeps you locked in a pattern where your emotional well-being is dependent on their unpredictable behavior. When you stay in this fantasy, you lose sight of what a healthy connection actually looks like. You become emotionally malnourished but convinced you're full. You begin to settle for the smallest gestures, the rare compliments, the occasional texts, thinking those moments mean something deeper than they actually do. But if someone only shows up when it's convenient or only gives you enough to keep you around, then what you're experiencing isn't love, it's emotional manipulation, even if it's unintentional. The shift happens when you decide to stop romanticizing the potential and start responding to the reality. The reality is found in how often they show up, how consistent they are, how safe you feel when you're with them. Do they make space for your emotions or do they avoid them? Do they engage in real communication or do they dodge intimacy every time it gets real? These are the patterns that matter, not the fleeting moments of connection. Detaching from the fantasy doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start choosing yourself over a version of the relationship that only exists in your imagination. It means holding people accountable to who they are, not who they could be if everything changed. When you anchor yourself in the truth of their behavior instead of the hope of their potential, you give yourself the power to move forward with clarity, strength, and self-respect. Boundaries are not about punishment or control, they're about clarity. They communicate where your limits are and what you're willing to accept in a relationship. When you're dealing with an avoidant person, boundaries aren't just helpful, they're essential. They become a mirror that reflects what you will and will not tolerate, and for someone who often avoids emotional responsibility, that can be a wake-up call. You're no longer silently absorbing their emotional inconsistency, you're naming it. You're calmly but firmly saying, this doesn't work for me. Most people think that setting a boundary will scare the other person away, especially someone avoidant. But the truth is, avoidants are more likely to respect someone who holds a clear line than someone who constantly flexes to accommodate them. When you communicate your needs without begging, when you express discomfort without drama, and when you say no without apology, you create a completely different dynamic. You're no longer reacting, you're leading. Avoidants often test how much they can withdraw and still keep you around. They want connection, but only on their terms, and if they learn that you'll stay, no matter how little they give, they'll keep giving less. But when you show them that inconsistency won't be rewarded, you interrupt their usual pattern. You make them face the reality that your presence is not unconditional when your emotional needs are ignored. And that interruption often forces them into a moment of reflection, even if they don't admit it out loud. The power of boundaries isn't in changing the avoidant, it's in showing them they have a choice. They can either meet you where you are or lose access to your energy. That choice is powerful, not because you're giving ultimatums, but because you're living by example. You're showing them what self-respect looks like in action. And that, more than any emotional play, is what can create real movement in the relationship dynamic. Many people think being kind means being endlessly tolerant, but real kindness includes honesty. Real kindness includes protecting your own heart while giving someone a chance to rise to the occasion. When you stop softening your standards out of fear that you'll lose someone, you create space for something far more meaningful: respect. Not everyone will rise to meet you there, but the ones who can are the ones worth building with. And for the ones who can't, your boundaries will make that clear sooner rather than later, saving you from years of confusion disguised as hope. Staying in a relationship that isn't meeting your emotional needs can feel like the noble thing to do. You might tell yourself that love means patience, loyalty, and understanding. And while those things are true in healthy relationships, there's a fine line between patience and self-abandonment. Many people stay far too long, hoping their unwavering commitment will finally convince the other person to step up, to open up, to reciprocate. But love is not about proving your worth through endurance. It's about being with someone who sees your worth without needing to be convinced. When you stay, no matter how distant, inconsistent, or unavailable the other person becomes, you're sending a message even if you don't mean to. That message is, you don't have to change because I'm not going anywhere. And for someone with avoidant tendencies, this can be a green light to keep operating at the same emotional distance. They learn that they can withhold, retreat, or stay half in without losing access to you. That dynamic doesn't inspire growth, it enables stagnation. The act of leaving isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about protecting your emotional health. It's about recognizing when your effort is no longer being matched and having the courage to say, this isn't enough for me. Walking away isn't heartless, it's an act of deep self-love. It says, I deserve to be loved fully, not partially. I deserve clarity, not confusion. It requires strength to stop hoping someone will change and instead start choosing what's real over what's possible. People often underestimate the power of absence. When you finally stop showing up for someone who has taken your presence for granted, it forces them to confront a version of reality they've been avoiding. Suddenly, they're no longer in control of how and when the connection happens. They're faced with the consequences of emotional neglect. And in that space, real reflection can begin if they're capable of it. If they do come back, it needs to be with changed behavior, not just apologies or nostalgia. Love isn't proven in what someone says when you're leaving, it's proven in what they're willing to do when they have the chance to keep you. And if they don't come back at all, then you've learned something even more valuable, that you were holding onto a connection that was never going to grow, no matter how much effort you poured into it. Staying no matter what doesn't make you more loving, it makes you more invisible. Walking away when your needs are not being met isn't giving up, it's choosing yourself in a situation where the other person hasn't. That decision doesn't make you cold. It makes you courageous. It shows that your love has value and that you won't. Keep offering it in places where it's only ever partially received. Avoidants often function best when they know you'll always be there, even if they're giving you very little. That steady presence, while well-intentioned, becomes a cushion they rely on without needing to engage emotionally. As long as you're always available, always responsive, always trying to make the connection work, they don't feel any urgency to reflect on their behavior or the health of the relationship. There's no consequence to their distance, so they stay distant. Your emotional availability becomes their safety net, allowing them to stay passive and disengaged without fear of truly losing you. But the moment you stop overextending, something shifts. When you no longer fill the silence, chase the connection, or soothe their discomfort for them, you disrupt the pattern they've grown used to. It's not about playing games or trying to manipulate. them it's about honoring your own limits. You're showing through action that your love isn't unconditional when your needs are being consistently unmet. You stop being the emotional safety net and you start becoming the mirror. When you pull back not out of spite, but out of self-respect, you give them the opportunity to confront what they need, opportunity to confront without your energy. That's when they start noticing the space you once filled. They realize how much you brought to the relationship because suddenly it's missing. If they are capable of self-reflection and emotional growth, this absence will hit them in a way your words never could. They'll feel the shift and for the first time be forced to consider what life is like without your constant emotional presence. Avoidants don't typically respond to pressure, persuasion, or emotional arguments. They respond to space, the kind that makes them aware of what they've been taking for granted. Your willingness to step back communicates something far more powerful than a plea ever could. It says, I care about you, but I care about myself too. I'm not going to fight for someone who won't meet me halfway. And in that space, the avoidant has a choice. They can step forward and show up in a more secure, emotionally available way, or they can remain distant, in which case your absence becomes a necessary form of protection. Either way, you win. Because the moment you stop being the safety net, you start being the standard. You stop participating in the imbalance and you start standing in your worth. That clarity either pulls them toward growth or pushes them out of your life, and both outcomes are a step closer to real, mutual love. Let me leave you with this. You don't need to beg someone to value you. You don't need to explain your worth to someone who's too afraid to get close enough to see it. You are not here to audition for love. You are here to share your life with someone who is ready to meet you in the middle, ready to stay through the uncomfortable moments, ready to grow and ready to give. If someone can't do that, no matter how much potential you see in them, it is not your job to fix, chase, or convince. It is your job to protect your peace, honor your standards, and move forward with your dignity intact. The truth is, you don't trigger an avoidant to realize your worth by chasing after them. You do it by knowing your worth so deeply that you're willing to walk away when it's not being recognized. Because your absence will say what your presence never could. I'm not afraid to lose someone who isn't afraid to lose me. Thank you for showing up for yourself today. Thank you for choosing the path of self-respect, even when it's hard. And thank you for listening not just to me, but to that voice inside you that's been whispering you deserve more. Take that voice with you. Let it guide your choices. Let it shape your standards. And let it remind you every single day that your love is a gift, not a reward for someone else's emotional unavailability. Take care of yourself. Choose yourself. And when the right person comes along, they won't need to be convinced. Thank you and goodbye.